How does a company go from a garage startup that only sells books to a global giant that sells, well, pretty much everything? In this explainer, we're going to dig into Brad Stone's incredible book, The Everything Store, to map out the rise of an empire. An empire built on data, a crazy long-term vision, and a drive that is, let's be honest, completely relentless.
Okay, this quote right here, it's basically the key to understanding the entire Amazon philosophy. It's so aggressive, it's totally disruptive, and it just perfectly captures the mindset that would turn retail, publishing, and even technology itself completely upside down. You see, Jeff Bezos looked at established industries with their nice, comfy profit margins, and he didn't see walls. He saw wide-open doors.
So what on earth gives someone the guts to leave a six-figure Wall Street job to sell stuff on the internet back in 1994? It really comes down to this one number: 2,300%. That was the annual growth of web usage at the time. For Bezos, this wasn't really a gamble. It was an absolute inevitability. He saw a tidal wave coming, and he just knew he had to grab a surfboard and fast.
So, how did it all begin? Well, it wasn't just some random idea like, hey, let's sell books. Nope, it was a super calculated decision, and it was driven by a really unique personal philosophy.
The logic behind that massive, life-changing decision came down to what Bezos himself calls the regret minimization framework. He basically pictured himself at 80 years old, looking back on his life. Would he regret leaving a stable, high-paying job? Nah, probably not. But would he regret missing out on the entire internet revolution? Oh, absolutely. That one thought was all it took for him to pack up his life and go for it.
All right, so out of all the things he could sell, why books? Well, he actually made a list of 20 potential products, and books just came out on top for a few very smart reasons. A physical bookstore, it can only hold a few thousand titles, but an online store could offer millions. Plus, they were pretty easy to ship, and every single copy of a book is identical, so no quality control issues. But crucially, and this is the big one, they provided a ton of data for building recommendation engines, which, as you know, would become a classic Amazon feature.
You know, those early days were anything but glamorous. This was a classic, scrappy startup. I mean, the company's first desks were literally just cheap doors with some legs screwed on. Frugality was baked right into the culture from day one, and it hammered home the idea that money should only be spent on what customers actually care about, not fancy office perks.
And that leads us to the second act of the Amazon story. The company's motto was, "Get big fast," and boy did it work, right up until it almost destroyed them. This was the wild era of insane growth, followed by an absolutely terrifying crash.
This slide really says it all, doesn't it? It shows this dramatic pivot in their thinking. The dot-com bubble burst, and that old mantra of growth at all costs just had to go. Suddenly, survival was the new priority. It was basically a forced maturation, a shift from a kind of reckless startup to a much more disciplined, strategic company.
And they came dangerously close to going under. The stock price just tanked. It dropped by over 90%. Analysts were actually predicting they'd go bankrupt. This wasn't just a small dip, it was a full-blown existential crisis that forced Amazon to rethink its entire business from the ground up. So how in the world did they survive? Well, yeah, there were layoffs and cost-cutting, but the real stroke of genius was launching Amazon Marketplace. All of a sudden, third-party sellers, even their direct competitors, could list their own products right alongside Amazon's. This created a massive new river of revenue with zero inventory cost, and it completely transformed their business model forever.
And this brush with death leads to the third major phase, the reinvention. After surviving the crash, Amazon didn't just go back to its old ways. It began this incredible transformation into the technology powerhouse that we all know today.
I mean, how does that even happen, right? How does an online bookstore end up powering a huge chunk of the internet and completely changing how we read? Well, it all boils down to a pretty simple strategy. Solve your own problems first, and then sell that solution to everyone else.
Amazon Web Services, or AWS, is the perfect example of this. Internally, Amazon's technology was, frankly, a total mess. So Bezos put his foot down and mandated that all internal teams had to build their services in a way that they could communicate with each other through simple, standardized rules. And once they built that incredibly efficient internal system, they had an aha moment. They realized they could just rent it out. And that internal tool became AWS, which is now a multi-billion-dollar business on its own. Now, to understand Amazon's next big move, we have to talk about this concept, disruptive innovation. It's not just about making a slightly better product. It's about making a totally new kind of product that just changes the entire game. And what Amazon did next was a textbook example.
What's so wild here is that Bezos was totally willing to cannibalize his own core business. He was terrified that someone else, probably Apple, was going to disrupt physical book sales. So he decided Amazon had to do it first. And the Kindle, with its free 3G WhisperNet that let you download books from anywhere, and a platform for authors to self-publish, completely upended the centuries-old publishing industry.
And this leads us to the final, and let's be honest, the most complicated part of the whole story. Because building the everything store came at a cost, and it raises this central question about what the company's ultimate identity really is.
Just look at this timeline. It shows the relentless, non-stop pace of their expansion and just how complex their operations were becoming. You've got e-readers, then huge tax battles, then warehouse automation, then groceries. Amazon's tentacles were just spreading into every single corner of commerce, and that started to create a lot of friction.
This table really breaks down that core tension. You see, every single tactic that gave a huge benefit to you, the customer, like lower prices or faster shipping, often came with a pretty controversial dark side. Aggressive pricing squeezed suppliers dry. Avoiding sales tax for years was seen as totally unfair to local businesses, and that intense drive for efficiency in the warehouses led to a lot of reports about grueling working conditions. And to put that last point into perspective, just think about this number for a second. 15 miles. According to the book, that's the distance that some warehouse workers reported walking in a single shift. It really grounds that abstract idea of efficiency in a very real, very human cost. So this all brings us back to the book's central question. Is Amazon a missionary, a company truly dedicated to serving the customer above everything else? Or is it a mercenary, just relentlessly pursuing profit and dominance, with the customer simply being the best way to get there? The truth, as the Everything Store really shows, is probably a complex and maybe even uncomfortable mix of both.